appreciate the young adults who serve alongside me on these research projects and provide insightful and invaluable insight into the findings and the methodology in creating these research projects. So couldn't do it without Foster Scholars. A shout out to them and the young adults that have helped us with these research projects. So thank you all so much. And also, I'm just super happy to be here again. I'm the co-founder for Education Reach for Texans, which is our statewide organization that supports students with experiencing care in their post-secondary education journey. I'm also the director in my day job. I'm the director of student services assessment at the University of North Texas. So I assess co-curricular learning in the student affairs division. So that is me. And I'm really excited to get into this topic. But before I do, kind of as I start to give this introduction, I would love for people to, I'm going to put a prompt in the chat now that most of us are here. And I'd love to know why you're here. Tell me why you're interested in this topic. And also, I'd love you to give me an emoji if you're currently serving as a liaison for students with experience in care. Also, you can give yourself an emoji if you've formally served, but I'd kind of like to know the expertise in the audience as we get moving along, and I'm going to see your responses kind of roll through the chat. So let's go ahead and get started. Here's our agenda for the day. So what we're going to be doing is talking about the need for foster care liaisons in higher education. We're going to be talking about liaisons and policy. We're going to talk about the liaison conceptual model and how it was built. This conceptual model that was built is a basis for forming and framing the liaison role. And we'll talk about how that's different than a coaching training or a liaison training. And then we'll talk about the purpose for the conceptual model and why we created it. And then we'll also talk about next steps, which will include a robust conversation about implications for research and practice. And then I would love questions and interaction throughout. Just kind of going to the chat really quickly, because I know a lot of you with the recorded version will not be able to see the chat. So, hey, David, shout out to Georgia. I'll be talking about you today in this presentation. Would love to create a model for your private university. Thanks so much, Brenda. Good to see you too, another Texas gal. I oversee programs in secondary ed for students in and out of home care and want to see how we can better support the transition to higher ed. I love that you're here, Lindsay. Welcome. Currently serving as a liaison, and I was briefly in foster care before being adopted as a child. So my interest is professional and personal. Thank you so much, Jessica, for being here. And I would love for you to chime in with your thoughts throughout. Tim, I run a program at Augsburg University. So glad you're interested. You're addressing this topic. Thank you. And again, I'm glad you're interested in here. I have organizational and clinical experience working with youth and young adults with experience in care, and also research child welfare and foster care. Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm interested in this topic because it's directly related to my dissertation. Wonderful, Nadia. And then I run a program at Seattle University. Fantastic. Welcome. Director of Fostering Success University at Arizona. Thank you so much for being here, Danny. I think you might have some insight. There's a shout out to you as well. Student Success, East Georgia State College. Wonderful. And then Angela, welcome. Angela has been a co-creator of our research in the past. So thank you for being here, Angela. Okay, well, there are others in the chat, and I'm so sorry if I didn't give you a shout out, but what a fantastic group today. This is going to be amazing. And please, I know that these sessions tend to not be interactive. I wanted to make it to where this is a webinar format where you might kind of multitask a little bit. I've never done that before. I'm not at all guilty. I'm totally kidding. I multitask all the time when it comes to webinars. So I get it if you need to kind of tap in and tap out, but this is recorded and it's available if you ever want to revisit it. So let's get into our content. The purpose for creating this conceptual model was for us to understand how to evaluate. We didn't have a framework outside of the Casey Family Program's student success framework that I'll talk about later, to evaluate liaison models, and so or the trainings to figure out what it was about the base and the core of what liaisons should be doing and how we define their role and how we justify their role in higher education. So that was the purpose and sort of like our initial investigation into this topic is we really wanted to get on paper what others thought about what the liaison should do. So why foster care liaisons? Why is this even important? Education is a protective factor, and that's seen as a research-based outcome. So if we're looking at education as a protective factor, liaisons play a massive, massive role in that, in the access, persistence, and graduation of students with experience in care and higher education and support systems. They provide cultural and social capital for our young adults, and we'll dig into cultural capital a little bit, but this conceptual framework is based on a social capital model. We'll talk more about that later. Liaisons are coaches, and they help increase perceived success and confidence. And we've seen that anecdotally, and we've also seen that in research projects where students feel more confident, they feel more connected, it increases that sense of belonging. And they're important, they play an important role in that. They're trauma-informed trained. Most of our liaisons, we like to have them trauma-informed trained. That's the goal. Even in Texas, not all of our liaisons are trauma-informed trained, and we open up that training every year to our liaisons, but many of them are transient. They come in and out of their jobs. People aren't, sometimes they don't find that next replacement. And so being trauma-informed trained is at the top of the list of why liaisons are different than just having any kind of point of contact in higher ed. And then they help create different programs and projects and social networks. They help provide resources. They collaborate with students with experience in care and also with stakeholders on and off campus. They work hard, very, very hard. Many of y'all showed me those emojis. Y'all work hard at your job. And sometimes, most of the time, it's another duty as assigned. There's another research project we did in Texas to evaluate our statewide liaison legislation, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But many of our liaisons reported this being another duty as assigned. Very few are paid just to do this work. And they connect young adults with social experiences, career, and education supports. So what do liaisons do? They are the first point of contact. That first point of contact is incredibly important. It's that first referral that a young adult will go to the liaison, and hopefully moving to the next item, they'll have a campus support program where they can then refer students very quickly and eliminate barriers and provide very quick, swift pathways to success for our young adults. But they are that first point of contact. The wraparound support in higher education also might look like, so a liaison is one person. Many people think a campus support program is just that you have a liaison on your campus, and it's just not true. The liaison is the first point of contact. It's one person, but a campus support program entails, really in the title, it's a campus-wide effort. It's a campus support. Liaisons cannot do it all. Many of you who have acted as liaisons, we don't want to do it all. We want to have robust systems of support for our young adults. So that liaison can create a campus support program. And I will share resources at the end of this webinar to show you how you can find those resources to build those campus support programs. And then that third thing is student organizations. So we'll talk about the role the liaison has. And often a liaison has to do a lot of work on campus before students even show an interest in building a student organization. And many young adults don't necessarily want to build a student organization as just the center point of identity of their experience in care and the intersections of that. And, some of them will come to those one-on-one meetings of support with the liaison, but then they opt out for doing a student organization. So the wraparound support in higher ed looks like these three components. And then there's lots to these components. The history of foster care liaisons specifically, there's some of this that's in Texas, and some of this also applies to our partners throughout the nation. So many states first implemented K-12 foster care liaisons, and that was true in Texas. So the Every Student Succeeds at ESSA asked that there would be a point of contact in K-12 systems for students with experience in care, and complying with that federal law, our state enacted mandatory K-12 liaisons. And that was the case for a lot of different states as well. And then very quickly, we initiated, along with Florida beat us, but Florida had them first. I think California actually had them first. I take that back. State initiatives to build foster care liaisons at the higher ed level. And so these state initiatives, I don't know, like we can debate on that in the chat, who did it first, but I think Michigan might've been the first. So anyway, these partners, Michigan, California, Florida, and Texas, were really close to one another in building these systems, statewide mandated systems of foster care liaisons. And then so many of our colleagues in Georgia and in other states are working to do the same, although they've done such great grassroots efforts at the state level. You know, some of them don't even have to mandate liaisons. They just organically, people came up and raised their hand and are acting in that role. So it's fantastic work. But so it kind of started in K-12 in a lot of spaces, moved into higher ed. And then there are state mandates versus state initiatives. So that's sort of to the example that I just gave with like our friends in Georgia. Many of them have foster care liaisons at the state level. It's actually how many of us started. Florida and Texas for sure started that way, where we just kind of reached out and did these campaigns and tried to get as many people to play those roles as we could before then it was mandated at the state level. It's still an unfunded state mandate for a lot of places, and there's problems with that we can talk about. And then liaisons are also called other things. So you might hear coaches. Fostering Success Michigan uses coaching, has a coaching model. Sometimes you hear advisors. Many times you hear an advocate at a statewide level, and champion is super popular, and it's based on that language from the Family KC programs supporting success document on how to create a campus support program. So higher ed champions was the language they used. And those are the different names you'll hear. But really, we're all doing similar work, no matter what we're called. So let's talk about legislative mandates. So this is particular in Texas. This is the education code in Texas, and they look very different across. Florida's looks very different. We actually modeled ours from Florida initially, where they named a point of contact, and I'm not sure how their legislation has evolved, but ours evolved. We had multiple renditions of it in the late 2000 teens. So you must name a point of contact at every 2-year and 4-year public waiver granting institution, which that also includes technical schools that are state funded. They must have a point of contact on the website. So we added additional language later because the state mandate just wasn't doing it. Many of them weren't doing the basic bare minimum. And these last 3 items we added as the basic bare minimum. So you have to put your name on a website so people can find you. You have to find a list of the students on your campus. And when you find that list, you have to contact those students and let them know about their benefits at the very bare minimum. So you can tell how this liaison, the way it's defined in legislation, and we'll talk about the way it's defined professionally and how we came about this project. But the way it's defined in legislation, super narrow, right? This has nothing to do with robust campus supports and supporting students and their educational and career success. This is just like be visible and like have a pulse. So these legislative mandates, they go far, but we expand in our professional networks like Education Reach and Fostering Success Michigan and California Blueprint Project and all of their campus champions. We dig way deeper than that. So we're going to talk about the depth. So for our project, the methods of our project, we went about it 2 different ways. We did a content analysis of statewide manuals and trainings, and then we also pulled job descriptions. So let me talk to you about this first. So the statewide manuals were any state initiative like Education Reach, like Positive Pathways in Florida, has a statewide training manual for liaisons that's encompasses pretty much the role from start to finish. So we used 7 of those, and we also used some professional development trainings, including Fostering Success Michigan's their coaching model, and the language they used to describe their model. So that's what the statewide manuals and trainings that we used. At the time of this study, there weren't many. There are more now since this has been published. And so there are even the resources that I share and that are in the article that we published in 2022. We've come a long way, right? Because many of you know how long it takes to publish something. So like the second it's published, it's already like a year behind. But it's progress. And then we used job descriptions. So at the time, honestly, Michigan was owning it, and they were hiring foster care liaisons. Many of them were called case managers. And we used their job descriptions and did a content analysis of what they were asking those people to do. And then also looked at the different manuals and the trainings, and then cross-compared those, looked for themes. And then I'll be reporting out on the consistency in a lot of those themes. And then we went to key informants. So if you're not familiar with Fostering Academic Achievement nationally, FAHE, they're a fantastic nationwide organization that is the hub for all of these statewide networks and provides camaraderie, sometimes just like professional empathy with things that are going on at the state level and politics and things. But they are a source of information, and many of the people, like friend Lori Tiller at Georgia and Maddie Day, who is just like the creator of all the things support in higher education. These 2 wonderful people have really paved the way in support for statewide networks. So statewide networks like Education Reach for Texans could not do the work we do without FAHE. And so we went to FAHE as a key informant and asked participants, a part of the group and their individual statewide networks, if they could provide any job descriptions, statewide manuals for trainings, anything that they could provide us that would help us understand the liaison role and how it's done across the nation. So with the analysis was split into 2 different categories. We had 2 different major research questions. So we were looking at how is the foster care liaison defined? We often looked for a definition to cite in the literature and just couldn't find anybody who had even tried to define the foster care liaison role in peer-reviewed literature. So one thing we wanted to do was to use all of these documents to kind of culminate in a content analysis and create a definition. Now, the definition we created, the reason we built this conceptual model is we want it to be poked and prodded and evolved and blown up. It was a starting point for us. It was the best of what we had at the time. And so we'd love to use this model in a way to start research projects and to start questions. So we have a lot of academic humility with the model that we created, and that we want people, especially you that are a part of this call who care so much about this, to really probe it and question it and make it better. But we needed a starting point. So we used these documents to define the role, and then we used it to justify the role. So what is it about what a foster care liaison does that's unique and different, and that also aligns with this definition? So here's what we found. The definition that we created for foster care liaison, again, was based on a national sample of these documents that we had in a content analysis. So the most important in the first part of this definition is the first point of contact. Because that across the board in all these documents was what the liaison did best. It was that soft entry point into higher ed. The first point of contact for students with experience in foster care and higher education, who helps students with experience in care navigate the institution, shares resources and benefits available to students with experience in care, uses positive language focused on student strengths, and works with students with experience in care to help them achieve their academic, professional, and personal goals. So that's the definition. Now let's talk about their tasks. So once we defined the role, we were really interested to see, okay, well, here's what they do. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of what types of tasks that they're asked to do. So this is the very basic model that we came up with that centers the theoretical framework of social capital. So very pervasive in literature. There's discussions of social capital, and we'll talk about cultural capital. That's actually a limitation to this project because we hadn't initially in the first round hadn't themed cultural capital across, but we absolutely think cultural capital is just as important as social capital. And that is an area for future research that I think people could really dig into the types of social capital and flesh that out. We didn't, when that was a limitation to our research before we published it, we didn't want to just use it as an add-on and just do like another cultural capital theme, because we felt like that did not do the project justice, that we really needed to dive deep into cultural capital. So it was a limitation to this project that we did, but we'll talk about how that's a limitation and how you all can help us do more research on cultural capital with this population. And I'll define cultural capital as well then. So social capital is defined as these social networks or expansive networks that a student can list, can count, can name, that help them progress through their personal, professional, and career goals. So the social capital are the people, the things, the interactions that a young person has, the people that they have to call to help with professional referrals, to get ideas on jobs, to progress forward with this treasure of information that we keep and sometimes only pass down to our children. That this is the kind of social capital, the information about how to social mobility and how to get ahead in the world. All of this is based on the liaison's role and how they interact with people outside and connect that students with different stakeholders. So the 3 different functions that we found in the documents, one was relational, the other was functional, and then the third is transformational. So if you see, there's this dark spot in the Venn diagram, and that's where the real transformation lives for our young adults. The ones that we see can have observable outcomes that we see in them, where they get it, right? So we say these things like, wow, that student really gets it. They're really doing great. What is it about those outcomes where we can pinpoint those outcomes to get them to that transformational space? But a liaison does all 3 of these things, and all 3 intertwine and interact with one another. So let's talk about them individually. The functional tasks are defined by those performed in the absence of students with experience in care and are administrative in form. Sometimes they're performed with students with experience in care with guidance and follow through. So we'll talk about that. So the sort of theme for this is done for, not always with, sometimes with. So functional tasks can be creating a campus support program. And although you might use students with experience in care to help identify people and identify topics and agenda and be a part of that campus support panel and that advisory group, they are not the ones making those professional contacts to get those people seats at the table. They could be. But usually this is a liaison function that makes those contacts to make these sort of environments and space happen for students with experience in care. So some examples are referring students to resources. So if we've made that point of contact with that professional resource. When we refer students, we've already done the work to establish a relationship with that on-campus, off-campus partner, and then that referral is seamless. But that's the work of the liaison in that functional task. We help students with experience in care with housing and financial aid to maximize their funding. And doing that takes partnerships that are established with them through the liaison work. Serving on committees that aim to improve higher education outcomes with students with experience in care. Often our students with experience in care are at the seat of the table on these committees, but the foster care liaison might create these committees and might have the vision to pull the people together. But those are those functional tasks that they do. So here are the themes within the functional task. Referrals are the top #1 theme that came up in the functional task. So this is the one referral rule concept. You'll see a lot in the literature. Our liaisons want to send one point of contact to that young adult. They don't want them going somewhere and being like, oops, this wasn't the right place. Let me turn around and go back. And I think just as anybody is annoyed by that. And so this one referral rule is super important to the liaison function. Collecting, tracking, and analyzing data came up a lot across the different statewide manuals. So suggestions for counting and tracking and analyzing data were to count the count of numbers on your campus. So how many students are using the tuition waiver? How many students are here on a scholarship? How many students do we have in our program? How many students have identified themselves through these different data portals? And in Texas, we have 3. We have the financial aid question. We have added a question to our Apply Texas application. So if you're applying in the state of Texas, there is a foster care question on that. And then we also have those who are using the tuition waiver. So we get data from our bursar's office. So with all 3 of these data sources, sometimes there are overlap and sometimes there's not. So they're inconsistent, but we take all 3 of those and pile them all together. And that's how we get the cumulative students that we are serving on our campus. So tracking that data is important. Participation numbers at events, counts of students by year, new students by year, retention and GPA, average number of credits attempted and completed, which is incredibly important, is we're progressing them towards a degree. And then graduation numbers, how many of our students are graduating from our programs and that we're supporting there. Tracking and analyzing data is so important, especially if any of y'all are interested in fundraising and or have to fundraise, which many of our liaisons do in Texas. And having this data is an important part of that conversation. It also justifies why we're here. So mental health management, this is strengths-based positive youth development, focusing on strength-based language. Know your professional boundaries. And this is for a liaison to not only, I'm kind of smirking because many of you have acted as liaisons, have probably really ruptured your professional boundaries. I know I have. And not to like disclose all the things, but you find yourself, picking people up at airports and, dropping people off in places and, taking $10 out of your wallet sometimes to help a student. Like there's so many of these professional boundaries that we can violate. And so it's having a conversation, I think, with one another about how comfortable we are like flirting with those boundaries and where we really should step out and create autonomy for students and self-efficacy, that they can do it, that they can see themselves being successful and not doing things for them. And then being trauma-informed trained is super important for our liaisons. And helping students with mental health management, it's hard for us to recognize behavior that might need a referral if we're not trauma-informed trained. And it's also helpful in just creating that listening, active listening, open space for our young adults to share their past, their dreams, their future, their goals. And then helping them access health benefits is a task for a liaison. It's important for them to know those those pathways and understanding those. Referrals to treatment programs might came up in those documents, and also you might need to have those contacts handy and ready. Services for parenting, this is childcare and health. So if there are questions that young adults have about your state health program that might be covered by the state, the services for parenting are huge because as the data tell us that many of our young adults have children by the age of 21. And so it's likely that we're going to serve parenting and pregnant young adults. I'm going to stop here and see. Jenna, do we have any questions?
There are no questions in the chat right now, but people feel free to put questions in the chat.
That's perfect. Thank you. Okay, so let's get into relational tasks. The relational tasks are defined by helping students with experience in care with their personal and academic success and are accomplished because of a relationship with that foster care liaison. So this gets into the relationship, the one-on-one, and we say as a theme for this, the power of cooperative one-on-one meetings, one-on-one interactions with students. From my own personal experience as a liaison, I'm not sure how it's worked for y'all. Many of our students, we'd always talk about how hard of a time it was for us to get students to show up to events, and we're having this event and they're just not coming. But when I would open up to one-on-one meetings, many of the students I never saw would come to the table. And so the one-on-one meetings started to become our best point of practice, where we would encourage the one-on-one sessions. And often we would have an opportunity then to share, hey, we really have this event that you should come to, or that you might consider. And and or understanding maybe why they're not interested in coming a little more. So it gives us a time as we're talking about these examples to have that guided questioning with our young adults to see really what matters for them. Often we do programming thinking we know what they need, and many times that it's not what they need or it's not what they want. And so these one-on-one relationships give us an opportunity to give them the resources that they need and tailor in a one-on-one setting to share all of those resources with them at that time, instead of doing it in this kind of large environment, event environment. It also means relational tasks mean to help work on promoting academic success, student development, and goal setting. And we'll talk about all three of these things in depth. And then it helps us probe for information that might encourage positive growth in students. So when we really have these opportunities to challenge them and to share opportunities, this is the time where it's great to do that, because we've established rapport and trust, and we're building a positive relationship with that young adult. And then they're more likely to come back to us with more information that they might need. Okay, so the themes with the functional tasks, but promoting academic success actually came up 25 different times in 9 different sources that we analyzed. So this was a big one. Identifying problems early came up a lot. That, when you look at early alert systems, that's later on down. A lot of times, if we don't have a relationship and or if we don't have an early alert system associated with our organization or our institution, then we don't know if a student is performing poorly academically unless we have these one-on-one check-ins with them and or frequent check-ins online. And we can probe them at unique times about important academic deadlines. And, if you have a class that you need to drop, you really should drop it by this date. Or it looks like you're progressing academically great. So can you come in and share your academic success tips, and that you can share in a peer network? So we can have an opportunity to have these conversations with young adults. Tutoring and study halls are also pretty popular. That came up in the literature or came up in the documents. Providing these spaces for students to have quiet study time with the accountability around their peers seem to help a lot. Although I think that there's a lot of investigation and research that we can look into with tutoring programs and actually pinpointing the types of academic success. And this might be being done. I'm just not in that literature. So that's a really cool area we can start looking into, is the benefit of those tutoring programs. And then having grade checks. If you do have a pretty robust campus support programs, you can do grade checks on your students if you have access to student management systems online, and many of us do, where you can periodically kind of check these grades. Now, in the middle of the semester, it doesn't track those semester. You can do those grade checks at the end, but you might just do a grade check with students and say, hey, I'm just checking in to see how you're doing this semester. Like, what are you struggling with? What are you doing great at? And let's have a conversation. And then these functional tasks were also with academic life skills. So many of the documents suggested sessions and training on organization, time management, test taking strategies, and study skills. The second theme was student development. So a lot of our liaisons in higher ed come from student affairs and student development. These are student development specialists, but pretty much the student development is defined and encompassed by these things below. So developing competence to help students understand that they are here to become content experts, and they're here to have successful careers. So how can we help them develop those marketable skills that help them in those careers? The student development is all about assessing co-curricular academic learning outcomes and professional personal outcomes. So, and that can entail helping manage emotions. Managing emotions can also look at like taking critical feedback. If any of y'all have worked with young students with experience in care, the trauma brain response can be real in a lot of situations where we can encourage them and take them on journeys to help them manage those emotions. It's also a habit of mind. If any of y'all are into habits of mind, a lot of people are starting to use those in higher education instead of Bloom's taxonomy. because it is a taxonomy to measure the outcomes, the psychomotor outcomes that we see in a lot of our young adults in higher ed, and how these are what's most important to their career: showing up on time, coming prepared, taking critical feedback positively. All of these things are things that we can help coach our young adults with. And then help with movement through identity skills. And I keep this broad because there are so many components to our young adults. Like the intersections are very powerful with the young adults we serve. And so how can we help them with identity development and referring them to different places on campus and in the community that can help with those identity skills? And this could be through gender performance, race, all the different kinds of identity skills, moving through autonomy and self-authorship, all of these things. Developing mature interpersonal relationships is also big. And so helping them with those functional tasks, establishing identity, developing purpose. And actually these are, career readiness, and then personal responsibility. So this is housing and finances and all of that. And I believe I have this title wrong. So I think this is supposed to be relational tasks. So I apologize about that. I threw myself off. Okay. So when we're looking at goal setting, or maybe we are in functional tasks. See, I'm just like cruising along. So we're with the goal setting component of it. This came up 11 different times in 4 different documents. However, when it came up in these 4 different documents, it was very substantial, like how we should help our young adults. So we're looking at helping students with experience in care and helping them envision future goals. So this is goal setting is twofold. And this is the way that it's twofold: envisioning and helping them achieve measurable goals. Often our young adults have can envision their goals for the future, but some of them come in, and some of them have had them in preparation for adult living. But establishing goals that are measurable is a skill that a lot of our young adults can benefit from. And so helping them, usually they don't need help envisioning. Most of the time I see that it's that making those SMART goals, the realistic, achievable, and measurable. And that's what a liaison can do to help. So with the goal setting, here's what it looks like: academic, professional, and personal goals, and identifying plans for each one of those. So they can do a lot of listing and doing like own personal paths, vision boards, like all types of really cool creative things in your one-on-one sessions. Also, I've seen a lot of programs actually do vision boards as a team activity with their student organization. It helps them identify strengths, passions, goals, and potential areas for concern, and looking at those shadow side things. Creating individualized education and career plans with measurable steps, again, measurable and achievable steps. Create time-bound goals. So we want to make sure to help them put a time on them. And so sometimes that might look like short-term, long-term goals. But even with that language, sometimes that can be overwhelming to young adults. And so often that time-bound, just taking like tiny little steps and not giving like a 3-year strategic plan, like a 3-year life plan, but maybe a plan for the year or a plan for the semester. So kind of keeping them incremental in achievable ways. And then maintaining regular contact is important. So let's move into transformational tasks. So this is defined by the partnerships between the liaison and community partners that widen students' social and professional networks and enhance opportunities for student success during and after post-secondary education. Again, when we looked at that Venn diagram, these are the moments where we really see those observable outcomes, where we see students thriving. And if we don't have a logic model or we don't have an evaluation plan for our program, often it's hard for us to actually pinpoint what those outcomes are. But if you do have a plan and you have written down the measurable outcomes for your program as a liaison, you can see a linear relationship between some of these activities and one-on-one sessions you're doing and this sort of growth that's happening at the end, which can be pretty powerful to see. So strong one-on-one relationships have to be a foundation. So transformational tasks are sometimes hard if that relational aspect isn't there. It's hard for us to empower students and see those observable outcomes if they don't trust us, if they don't respect us, and if we haven't taken the time to listen and be in a respectful relationship with those young adults. And then it also helps these transformational tasks ultimately help career and educational success. That's when we really see them thriving academically and thriving in internship, and putting themselves out there and taking chances and, all of that stuff we see. The theme for this is a synergistic effect, and I'm using like the chemistry definition of this, where if y'all, the word synergy kind of gets thrown around, but I love the chemistry sort of thought to this, how you can take, two elements and they actually are more than the sum of their parts. And so this synergistic of these transformational tasks do that. We sort of see the liaison and the student come together, and what they can do together is incredibly powerful, using these professional networks to enhance that success. So transformational tasks were actually the most frequently mentioned task in all the documents. So the people in the nation have very high expectations for what liaison should do, because this was the most frequently mentioned, these transformational stage. So what are they? So they're creating on-campus networks. So this was mentioned 42 times in 9 different sources. It's the most powerful role a liaison can play, is creating a solid on-campus network for our young adults. Any problem for trying to get ahead and not predict, that would be hard. But to try to get out in front of, using our past experience and using best practices from other liaisons, can actually try to limit barriers for our students on campus, but also provide like a very robust social network for our young adults, where they feel like they belong, they feel like they're cared for, and they feel like they can thrive on the campus. Peer networks and student organizations are incredibly powerful. Peer networks were listed a ton in the documents. And there's a lot of literature on how beneficial peer networks are for not only kids in foster care, but students with experience in care and higher ed. And then support and education for what we call the space between graduation and career. And I know my friend Carrie Kearney has brought this up a million times, is talking about what are we doing for students after they graduate? Because often the transformational tasks happen here where they feel comfortable. I'm not going to say safe, because I don't believe there are safe spaces, but where they feel comfortable and they feel cared for here. And then when they graduate, they go back into this world that's unknown. The housing may be an issue for them. The familial wealth often isn't there. So what happens with that transition with professional clothing, transportation, like what does that look like for a young adult after they graduate from college and that transition space? So we really need to be thinking more about what that looks like for the adults we serve. And then moving to the second theme, this was mentioned 30 times in 5 different sources, creating off-campus networks. So these are partnerships. This kind of works in like a tiered order. So partnerships with K-12 liaisons to access into higher education. Access is a big issue. And of course, access to higher ed doesn't mean they're going to be successful, which is why the liaison is essential. So those K-12 partnerships, if you don't have K-12 liaisons in your state or in your area, and if you don't know who those K-12 liaisons are, reach out to somebody who might, and or, develop those partnerships with the school district and ask, who's your K-12 liaison and how can I get in contact with them? There's a very large chance that they are not trained. Not only are they not trauma-informed trained, but are not really understanding what they're supposed to do in their role. Again, because people in the education system are transient, just like higher ed. A lot of liaisons come in and they do the role for, 2 to 3 years, and then they're gone and they move on to something, they get a promotion, and then that role, a brand new person comes in. So keeping up with making sure these liaisons are adequately trained in their role is a challenge for statewide networks. And then offering career workshops and seminars is important. Again, that preparation for their career when they graduate, and kind of like focusing that on that transition in that space between. Identify career mentors and employers. So this is for jobs and internships. And specifically, this links almost directly to that social capital. So what is it about getting a foot in the door that might help our young adults at an internship or a job that we might have a connection with alumni from our institution, or your organization might have connections with industry? And so identifying those mentors for those young adults before they graduate is essential. So then they have those connections, which they may or may not have brought in with them. And then fundraising opportunities to financially support students. So we have Brenda Sweeten here at UNT does a fantastic job of this. And Amy O'Keefe and at Texas Women's, Denton's bringing it strong, also does a really great job of this. It's fundraising, pulling in funding from outside sources to help financially support the students on campus. So if we're looking at cost of attendance, and many of you know where I'm going with this on the call, in higher education, often our young adults don't even qualify for some of the benefits that they're entitled to, because their cost of living is already met with Pell and with federal aid. And so if we can provide gift cards for them or emergency funds that might be outside of the institution who can pay vendors directly, this really supports our young students on campus who might not have, again, that generational wealth to help them or that familial privilege to help them in higher education. So those fundraising opportunities are really important and are increasingly more so important for these off-campus networks for liaisons. And then encourage community involvement. How can students help educate the community? How can the community help provide professional experiences and expertise for our students with experience in care, and looking at that mutually beneficial relationship and what that looks like. The last theme for transformational tasks are working collaboratively. So this came up 12 different times in 5 different sources. So again, building one-on-one relationships is important. It needs an open line of communication, building that trust and respect, providing inclusive environments. And we could do like a whole day workshop on providing inclusive environments, which leads into tapping into cultural capital. We need to have liaisons who think about inclusivity and think about equity in very transgressive ways. Increased confidence is important with this transformational task. We really want to help students reach their ultimate level of confidence when they leave, so then they feel like they're career and life ready. Introduce them to resources that support success. We have the hands-on then hands-off approach, where many liaisons are familiar with sometimes how we have to be hands-on, but then knowing that opportunity for a student to take on and do things with their own autonomy and increasing their own confidence. So balance, like that dancing act, is really important with the liaison. Often, many of them just have a hands-off approach, and it's like you do it or you don't. And so, but ultimately that student success is our goal. So if students aren't doing those things and they aren't following up with those referrals, we have to be creative about how we can get them to be successful, and support them in that. Reminded that they do not have to do it alone. This is huge. And then building hope with students. A lot of students, I think, come from traumatic backgrounds, but then also our students are so passionate and they're so driven, and they're dedicated and they want to be here. They see themselves as college material. Many of them want to go. And so the low student success rates we see for graduation or is a lack of students really not having the support from liaisons and a community support network. So we need to build more robust programs so we can see students successful and see them through the finish line. So these are the culminating concepts, the little so what's behind what we found. So we need to partner with students. We are not here to do work for them, but we are here to ensure their success. So whatever that looks like, that collaborative hands-off, hands-on approach. Encourage autonomy and self-efficacy. Students can do it. We see them do it every day. And so, but they have to believe that for themselves. So how do we play that, help them on those scales and getting those increased confidence and autonomy? We have to use trauma-informed and evidence-based approaches. And that's what is helpful with some of these coach trainings that I'll share as resources. And then we need to practice inclusivity and cultural awareness. I think many people, as a part of this project with Amy and the webinars, have talked about cultural awareness and creating that cultural capital. It's utilizing the cultural wealth and the knowledge and the wisdom that students have, or that young adults have brought in to higher education with them. And it's helping them tap into that and understand those connections with their cultural backgrounds and the richness of that, and using that as a building block to helping them with them creating their identity and who they are in the world. And it's our responsibility to help them with that. Positive and strengths-based language, and treat every student with love and empathy, but treat them all as unique individuals is what a lot of young adults are asking. We don't want to bring in stereotypes or this is what happened. You know, this is how we've served other students before. Treat us as individuals. So quickly, the implications for research and practice is the liaison job is a factor. So a lot of our liaisons are social workers or student affairs professionals, but they have either the trauma-informed care or the student development or both to bring to this role. Cultural capital is just as important as social capital, and so considering that in practice and in future research. Spiritual support is one that hardly ever comes up, but almost every research project I've been a part of, young adults talk about spiritual connections. And so how can we look into that more and help support them more in their spiritual growth and their spiritual wellness? Looking at social mobility frameworks, working with Dr. Sydney Curtis in Dallas on social mobility as a framework for, and possibly including that in the liaison role. So we can use social mobility frameworks to support our young adults. And then program evaluations. We need to evaluate our programs in more depth in higher ed and see what works and what doesn't work and share that out. And then think about how to expand services and relationships beyond college. So real quickly before I give you 5 minutes to ask questions, I'm so sorry. Had more to say than I thought. So here are some resources that y'all can take advantage of. I will be sharing this document out so we can get into questions, but really the manuals listed in the study can help you if you want to do some self-exploration. And then there are foster coaching trainings listed here and conferences that you can go to for more information and for more professional development. And I'm happy as well with my contact information here to connect you with any resource or find somebody who knows the answer to your question. But I'm going to give us 5 minutes for questions. So thank you all.
Thanks so much. That was wonderful. Feel free to type questions into the chat or the Q&A section, and we can read those out. And I saw the one question of, will this recording be available afterward? And the answer is yes, it will be on our website.
I'll also share the slides.
And thanks, Tim. He said it was very interesting. Lots of notes taken.
Great, Tim. I'm glad you were here. There's a ton of expertise on this webinar that people who are listening to this recording cannot see, but many people here that I've learned so much from and grew with over the last 15 years. So it's really cool to be a part of this network, but I'm going to challenge you all to look at this content and really push back at it. Reach out to me because I don't see any questions. So this is me babbling. So like, feel free to enter more questions in, but also we really want feedback on this model. Does this make sense to you? Does the way we described it and the way we define things, how can we look at things differently? We're open to any of those conversations and would love to have those conversations. Please reach out to me and let me know your thoughts.
Nadia said, I'm basing my dissertation off the study you co-authored, Campus Liaisons for Students Who Have Experienced Foster Care, Lessons Learned from Texas Legislation.
Yes, please email me, Nadia, because that we have a second part of that study coming out soon where we're looking at evaluating campus support programs across Texas to see, we're looking at low support and high support programs to look at student success rates are better are better with campuses with robust student campus support programs. So that should be a really cool paper, but we would love to connect with you.
And Maddie asked, I may have missed it, but did you look at programs that were serving broader populations, such as the homeless, juvenile
We
justice
did we
population?
did not, because there are so many of them, but that would be a really cool project, Maddie. There are more of those programs that serve a broader population, and we have had conversations with the state to expand the foster care liaison role to broader populations. I think the problem with homelessness is it's a transient population, so the data is hard to track. So that's why we've had a really hard time connecting with that population with grants and stuff. But it's a more nuanced conversation than that, but it's a great question. Uh-huh. Yep.
Another question is, how many campus liaisons do you have statewide in Texas?
We have 115 and about 96 institutions. So some institutions have more than one campus liaison. But honestly, they're some of the greatest people. The liaisons are always incredible to talk to see all of the really cool stuff that they're doing. I feel like there's got to be a way nationwide that we can share these best practices better with one another. Because when we hear them at the conference, it's ephemeral. It stays there and doesn't get out to anybody. So would love to, anybody who's interested in that, we've got a wide pool of liaisons who would be happy to share.
That's great. There's another comment here. In our program and on our campus, we talk a lot about navigational capital, the ability to maneuver through systems and institutions that historically were not designed for you, similar to social capital, but also unique and can provide different complementary set of questions.
And I don't know if I'm speaking because I'm still in the literature, but I think social mobility also addresses navigational capital as well. So I'm fascinated by that. Thank you for sharing that, Colleen.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your work with us today, Dr.
Of course.
Bustillos. Thank you, everybody, for being here and taking part in the webinar today. I hope everybody enjoys the rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.